Call to order the March 20th, 2023 special meeting of the President and the Board of Trustees. To honor the men and women in uniform who protect us and keep our country safe, I ask that you rise and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll now take the roll call. Trustee Chen.
Here.
Trustee Fink, absent. Trustee John.
Here.
Trustee Lewis.
Here.
Trustee Rudolph.
Here.
Trustee Terrell.
Here.
As a special note, Village President Alice Gallagher will be absent from tonight's meeting due to an illness that prevents her from attending and participating in the meeting. Given her absence tonight, per Section 1-5-4, President Pro Tem of the Village Code, the Village Board should entertain a motion to appoint a Village President Pro Tem to preside over tonight's meeting. Do we have such a motion?
Yes. I move to appoint Trustee Jim Terrell to serve as Village President Pro Tem during the March 20th, 2023 Special Village Board meeting.
Do we have a second?
And I'll second that motion.
I'll now take a roll call vote. Trustee Chen.
Aye.
Trustee Fink. Trustee John.
Aye.
Trustee Lewis.
Aye.
Trustee Rudolph.
Aye.
Trustee Terrell.
Abstain.
Motion carries. We'll now move to the agenda.
Thank you, Clerk Tibick. I trust the trustees have read the agenda. Do any of the trustees have any additions or deletions to tonight's agenda?
No.
Hearing none, then we'll move on to citizen comments. This is citizen comments for all matters on tonight's board meeting. So if you wish to make a comment, please come up and identify yourself and tell us what your comments are.
My name is Heidi Hansen. I'd like to start off by expressing my sincere hope that Alice Gallagher recovers quickly and fully.
Thank you.
Now, earlier today, I sent my comments by email to everyone. I don't know if they were received. They were? Okay.
Yes.
These are comments on the most recent version, which had some improvements, but one very disturbing regression, I guess, in that it now would allow for these transmitters to be much closer. Originally, we were thinking in terms of 25 to 30 feet. There's a provision in the most recent draft that says they can be as close as 12 feet to the ground. When you combine that with the manufacturer's specifications, you could actually, a tall man would be bumping his head on the area where you're not supposed to be. I see this as being very serious. I don't know what the village is going to do about it, but I'm absolutely livid that this came in so late, that it didn't give the village a chance to analyze it. It didn't give Mr. Chapman a chance to go back through his analysis and figure out whether or not there would be a violation of the radio frequency standards. It looks to me like it is, but I'm not an expert. I also wanted to, and I know I've raised this before, but in Section 3 it says the village will promptly approve of any future applications that have the same design on them. Well, is this a different design? I mean, how does this work? How do you figure out what the village is obligated to approve as opposed to what it can consider? Now, a section has already been taken out that referenced the village's ordinance, and there was a provision in the ordinance that said that you can't violate the radio frequency limits. That, as far as I read it, has been removed. And now the village is empowering itself to issue a permit in violation of the radio frequency limits. And I would imagine that the FCC would take a dim view of that. But again, I'm not an expert in that area. I don't know what could happen to the village if this gets signed and goes forward. I just want to raise this and say that it is a very great concern of mine. The other thing I'd like to suggest, and again, I'm livid at the fact that this came in at the last possible minute, is that the village stop feeding the beast. If Verizon is your carrier for village business, move on. Don't keep giving them money that they can use to turn around and threaten to sue you with. Thank you. Do you have any questions for me?
Actually, so we did discuss this prior. Attorney Jurusik, for your first one with the 12 feet, we just would like to address it based upon his understanding of the contract and that.
Yeah, Ms. Hanson, when you look at the agreement, it talks about radio equipment being not less than 12 feet. It doesn't talk about antennas. Or the radio equipment are the smaller boxes that don't, in my understanding, emit the RF frequencies. Those are going to be at a lower place on the pole. The antennas will be at a higher place. If you want us to clarify that, I certainly will have Mike Mars, my partner, do that. But if you read, it doesn't say, antennas. It talks about the radio equipment that supports the antennas. So the intent never was to move the antennas that emit RF emissions lower on the pole. Those technically, right, from a practical standpoint, the higher they are, the better they work. So those are going to be at the higher spectrum of the pole. The equipment that, works them was going to be not less than 12 feet on the pole. That's what the language says. But I'll have Mike clarify that, that the radio equipment, not including the antennas, will not be less than 12 feet. And we can work with that comment and make something, a little clearer to take care of your concern.
Okay, I think that would be an excellent idea because I interpreted radio equipment to mean
Anything?
radio
Yeah,
antenna.
and I agree, but we do talk about radio equipment. We also talk in the ordinance about, antennas and arrays. And
I'm sorry, could you speak up?
antennas and arrays are also discussed. So I'll make sure that that's refined.
Thank you.
Yep.
With regard to the promptly approving, am I right in understanding that the village basically has no authority to deny a permit if a future application complies with the design standards that are the same as the first application that is filed?
That's the intent, and so I know you talked about, you were concerned that, we would be, eliminating our ability to deny something if it violated the RF standards, but we're not giving that up. I mean, what we're saying is if they submit an initial design and it dots the i's and crosses the t's, checks all the boxes, and it gets approved, if they submit the same design 29 times over, there's going to be no basis for us to deny that if it's met the first approval and it, again, is the same design. If there's something different about the design that's impactful, then, the village will exercise, its authority, its discretion. But if they're going to roll out 30 designs, the first one being approved as their test kind of template, and the next 29 follow suit, there will be no reason for the village to not approve it.
I'd also add that the village staff has the same opportunity to review that permit and provide notice to residents and things like that. So none of that's being waived. We will still follow our process for permit review as we would have.
Yeah, and I was just commenting on approval of the designs, but absolutely, all the notices that go to the residents, none of that's being pulled back. And so manager's correct, and I'm correct in talking about just the mechanics of the actual approval. Manager's 100% correct, that, none of the notice to the community will change. None of our obligations in terms, self-imposed obligations of posting on the website and making sure that there's as much notice as possible to the community as these other 29 facilities get rolled out. And then beyond that, this only handles the west side of the community, right? When we get to the east side of the community, again, we will be following the same path forward and the same set of guidelines for that.
Well, I'm glad to hear that that is the intent. I still have a little concern with the language. There is a section where, again, that section, I believe it ends in an H of the ordinance, and I mentioned this in one of my earlier comments, appears to have been waived.
Well, we'll
And
look at that.
Thank you.
I'll have Mike
Thank
look
you.
at that. You're concerned about that, but again, that's certainly not the intent.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you, Ms. Hanson.
Hi, I'm Nancy Perlman, and I appreciate all the time that the board has spent in reviewing all this Crown Castle information. Since the last meeting, I did some research. I consulted with Marv Wessel. He is an independent RF engineer and CEO of Global RF Solutions, he was written about in the Wall Street Journal. And this is what I learned from my conversation with him. The Waterford report, the RF emissions compliance report submitted by Crown Castle, is an illusion that they are being compliant. It is misquoted and misguided, and it's an incomplete report. There's a huge conflict here between the Waterford report submitted by Crown Castle and the Erickson federal certification to the FCC, which is sworn testimony on what their equipment is capable of. Who knows more than Erickson about their equipment, the manufacturer in a sworn statement to the federal agency, the FCC, or the Waterford report submitted by Crown Castle? Ericsson's report states that the antennas exceed the occupational limit by a large margin, 5 times the amount. It also states it exceeds the public limits that are much greater than 2 feet. And what about people's bedrooms on the second floor? How will this affect them? The power is much greater from these antennas than what Crown Castle has told you. There's an additional important safety issue that needs to be addressed. An RF safety program needs to be created to protect the linemen who will be servicing the lines and the conductors. I don't know if the village has thought about that. Testing procedures for the antennas are expensive, and each of your family's lives are worth way more than the money spent on testing. Medical bills will be expensive per the research and physicians who treat people whose health has been injured from this technology already. If you won't do intermittent testing, then who will? As this company can manipulate the power or bring stronger technologies that will blanket your village. So what are the ramifications of all of this? I've given you copies of the Erickson official EMF test report given to the FCC on the Erickson Street Macro 6705 antennas. Also shared is the FCC Small Entity Compliance Guide on human exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic fields. And in May, these rules will be enforced and Crown Castle must comply. Don't let Crown Castle bully you with threats of being sued. Why sign this agreement if they're misleading you? How can you get sued if they aren't providing you with an accurate report? How can you trust them? My strong recommendation to you is to not sign the settlement agreement and have even Mr. Wessel, a third-party independent RF engineer, to review these and give you the report of his findings. What could be more important for the village right now? Once these small cells go in, it's done. I've talked to attorneys across the country about this. It'll be very difficult ever getting them removed or turned down or turned off. The preamble in our Illinois Constitution says, in order to provide for the health, safety, and welfare of the people, in order to provide for the health, safety, and welfare of the people. Board members, you took an oath of office to uphold our Constitution. Please reach into your hearts and do what you know is the right thing to do. Vote no on this settlement agreement, allowing time to review what I have presented to you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perlman. Anyone else like to comment?
Good evening. My name's Gary Bizzoni. I'm at 4600 Clausen. I sent through a couple of comments today via email regarding mostly aesthetics, which I believe is our one and only pushback point to this whole proposal. And those, if I can pull them up, were as follows. Number one, and Michael, these are, I guess, are mostly toward you from a legal standpoint. I don't know if we have the ability to review a mock-up of one of these first installations before the other 29 permit applications are approved. And I know there's been some very preliminary Photoshop renderings that our attorney and Stu keep pulling out but don't show much detail. And I know there's somewhat of a limited view exhibit pack that shows more of the details that we're not allowed to see. But I think there could be some things, like any other construction job, kind of hidden in the details that you see it in real life and you say, how did we miss that? So I guess the proposal would be, do we get, or could we get a mock-up of the first pole condition? And ideally 3 different pole conditions, one of just the plain antenna, another being the one that's added to a power line, and whatever other the exhibit was, just to make sure we're all well aware of what we're getting for the final product before the others are approved. Again, I'm not speaking on technical issues, I'm only speaking on aesthetic issues that might come up that I think were our only leg to stand on. Michael, the other one, and I come from the commercial office side, so often in tenant leases we have restoration clauses. So if a tenant vacates the space, they have to remove a lot of their added equipment and clean up the space. So the question would be whether there is a restoration clause in this agreement that says if Verizon for some reason leaves our market or goes bankrupt, crazier things have been happening these last 2 weeks. If there would be any restoration clause that says, we are now stuck with all your equipment, even in bankruptcy, that equipment needs to be pulled down. Equipment, related cabling, all related hangers, and basically restore to previous conditions. Item number 3 on the list was just concerning lighting, and I know, I guess my comment was that if there's, in the design standards, if it's any replacement lighting needs to comply with existing Western Springs lighting standards, either aesthetically, color lamp temperatures, height of the fixtures, all related things like that, that you're just not sticking a new LED or whatever fixture on the pole that doesn't match any of our other lighting from either a visual or a lighting quality or light level standard safety standpoint. And then last, but I have not heard about it in any of these meetings, but the agreement does not talk about any required tree trimming or pruning. If any of these antennas have to have some sort of line of sight to their final destinations. I'm not a technical expert in these. I don't know if that's required or not, but I'd hate to see yet another batch of what I call the ComEd trees that have a nice tree with a big middle and a Y shape. So like I say, I don't think tree pruning or anything tree related was addressed in that in the proposed addendum. So those were my comments. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mazzoni. Anyone else like to address the board? Okay, if no one else would like to come up and address the board, I would close the citizen comment portion of tonight's meeting and move on to old business. The first item on old business is an update on the collective bargaining agreement with the Metropolitan Alliance of Police, Western Springs Police Chapter 360. That comes out of my committee. As a trustee, I'm putting that out there for comment by staff.
Yes, I'm going to pass this over to Deputy Village Manager Casey Bernacki, who's been working on this item.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening. I'm pleased to inform you that the village's labor negotiations team has reached a tentative agreement with the Metropolitan Alliance of Police, or MAP, Chapter 360, on a new collective bargaining agreement. If you may recall, and for the public's sake, the MAP 360 agreement covers our 15 patrol officers in our police department, and it expired last year, March 31st, 2022. Some highlights from the proposed tentative agreement are April 1 annual increases for the fiscal years of 2022, 2023, and 2024, all at 3% increases. Included in that, for any officers that are still employed by the village and were employed after that April 1st, 2022 date, there'll be retroactive pay back to that date for the 3% increases in 22 and in 23. The field training officer stipend, that's another point that might have changed in this agreement. It's a change from a flat fee in the previous agreement to 1 hour of straight time for that employee who's working. And then we also were able to agree on some lateral hire language. The village has the opportunity to hire lateral police officers through the Board of Fire and Police Commission. A lateral officer is a police officer who has at least 2 years of experience in policing, and the lateral police officer process is actually separate from an entry-level police officer process. So the new language in the proposed contract allows the village to hire a lateral police officer at a higher rate in the salary schedule, really at any rate, as long as they have those years of experience in municipal policing. So the lateral hire language is another tool to try to combat the recruitment and retention issues that all municipalities are having when it comes to municipal policing. So there'll be a side letter as well that you'll have on your dais tonight that outlines provisions around that language as it relates to 4 employees who were lateral police hires that were hired before the language was put into place. So that language actually places them in the salary schedule where appropriate for their years of experience, and it solidifies that piece of the lateral language. There's some other language changes in there too from the previous contract on how overtime's calculated, and then some future intents to meet with the union when we have a body cam program implemented. But other than that, there's quite a bit in there. If you have any questions, I'm here tonight to answer.
Anyone have any questions? Okay, this will be on the omnibus later on tonight.
That's right.
Okay. Then moving forth to the second item of old business, discussion of revision of urban forest management plan. I think that's you, Trustee Chen.
Yes, if it's trees, it's coming out of my committee, Properties and Recreation, and we had a long discussion about this revision in our last Properties and Rec Committee, but I'm going to hand it over to Director Super to give us all further information and description.
Yes, thank you, Trustee Chen. I wanted to take an opportunity tonight just run through, since I was out sick at the last board meeting last week, there was a rather in-depth memo and some exhibits, and I wanted to walk through those just to make sure there's clear understanding of what the village staff is doing with the updates to the urban forestry management plan. So last year, the village approved the first urban forestry management plan for the village. The purpose of the urban forestry management plan is to basically put together the comprehensive roadmap for how the village manages the urban forest. In that plan, one of the things that we defined was the legacy tree program. And the goal was in early 2023 to develop the actual legacy tree list and then basically publish that list. Staff began working through that legacy tree definition and the calculations inside our tree inventory last fall. The current tree legacy tree definition that's in the plan right now is as follows on the board. It basically says a village-owned tree maintained with a minimum of a 16-inch diameter breast height or within the top 25% of the current champion size for the species, and with a condition rating of 1 would be classified as a legacy tree. Condition rating of 1 is the highest classification we have. We have a current 1 through 5 rating in our inventory system. So when we ran this analysis, unfortunately, hopefully you can see it okay on the map, very little trees actually came up and met the legacy tree definition, much less than we initially anticipated. In fact, one of the most significant trees that we think in town, which is right around the 4,500 block of Wolf Road, is a big elm tree. It's got to be at least 150 years old, probably 60 inches across, would not have fallen into this classification. We decided to go back and take a deeper look at that and look at some of the larger trees in town specifically to see what they've missed. One of the things that we found was that most of these significantly really large trees were not actually achieving a Class 1 rating, mainly because of their age. If you think about it, as we all age, we're not as fit as we used to be when we were 25. A lot of these trees might have had a limb that got lost during a storm. Maybe the under canopy was not as lush as the upper canopy is, but still overall culturally significant trees within the village. So we went through and looked at how some of these definitions were classified in the village. We looked at all of the major species that are classified within our inventory. Here I just put up a specific example. These are the maple trees that we have in town to look and review on how those classifications and everything fell. Looking at the maple trees, for example, we saw that the average size was around, I think, 13 to 15 inches in diameter, which indicated that those trees were also significantly younger. But when we also ran the data on how those trees were distributed, you can see that the distribution was skewed towards the younger trees, which are the younger trees on the left of this scale. And that's why we had kind of a disproportionate number of trees fall in this Class 1 rating. And because of the size, though, we wouldn't be able to achieve that diameter breast height that we were originally looking for with the 16 inches. So what we did, we went back to the process and we reanalyzed the tree species and the distribution of the trees within the inventory. And we came back with a new analysis of how to categorize the legacy trees. We updated the diameter breast height to actually include a higher ranking, a higher diameter. So we moved it up from 16 inches to 30 inches, but then also lowered the condition rating slightly because we found a lot of the larger trees in town, extremely good trees, very good condition, but they were falling in this 3 and 4 category. I'm sorry, 3 and 2 category of the rating system. We ran the analysis on that, and we ended up with a very even distribution throughout most of the community. There's approximately 500 to 600 trees that fell within this classification, which represents about 6% of the village's total tree inventory. And that 6% classification is roughly consistent with what we found with what other communities are doing in terms of what they're kind of trying to target for legacy trees. So we ran this through the committee this past month. Overall, there seemed to be very good feedback on the reclassification we have in for the board approval this evening, this change in the classification of the legacy tree definition. The other thing we wanted to look at too, that we noticed when looking at through some of these trees, as I noted before, I used an example in this earlier slide of where we use the maple trees in town. That's our Acer genus species. You can see from this chart that maple trees make up approximately 2,500 of the village's 8,000 trees. It's very high representation, an over-representation under the classification of the management plan. But what we wanted to try and capture was, of the 42 species of trees that the village has in town, about 30 of that species have 30 trees or less represented, which means they're underrepresented trees. We wanted to find a way to protect those trees that were mature enough to receive protection with it, because we don't want to remove, if we only have 12 of a particular tree, we don't want to remove a 12 or 14 or 16-inch tree when it has very low representation. The other thing to consider is different tree species grow at different rates. So a ginkgo tree, for example, is historically known as being a very slow grower. You could have a ginkgo tree that's 30, 40, 50 years old, and it might only be 12 inches, 14 inches, 16 inches in diameter. So we wanted to include some additional language in the plan to protect some of these underrepresented trees. And with that, we also put some additional language in to supplement the legacy tree program. These trees themselves would not be considered legacy trees, but we would be protected with similar language under the underrepresented tree program. When we ran the analysis on that in the tree inventory, we came up with approximately 60 additional trees throughout the village, and you can see those marked in pink on this map, and the legacy tree definition would be marked in green. I actually do have the entire tree inventory marked on here, but those are gray, and it probably doesn't translate well through the display here. But so we're still right around that 6 to 7% of the tree inventory that would be captured underneath these classifications. So in the board then tonight is the additional language, the underrepresented tree protection. This is almost the similar, exact same language as the legacy tree definition, but really has some additional provisions that account for forest diversity. And then that classification would be a 16-inch diameter tree, or representing 25% of the current champion size for the species within the village. And again, using that condition rating 3 or better. not sure if there's any questions on that. I went through that very quickly, but that's the proposed changes we have in the board packet for this evening.
And Director Super, can you tell us what a tree falling into the legacy tree definition, what does that entail?
Yes, great question. So essentially what that would do is, primarily the goal of that is to make sure that those trees are absolutely protected, related primarily around either public utility or private development that occurs in the parkway. We do have provisions that if somebody's building a new house, for example, and they want to move the driveway from one side to the other side of the property, we have provisions that allow to accommodate for that. And we can have the cost of that tree and the wood and the value accommodated for as part of the plan. But this language puts a much tighter provision on protecting those trees to ensure that those trees are not only not really considered for removal, but also much more tightly protected during those development phases. And they're much more tightly monitored and regulated by the village when development or construction is happening in and around those areas.
Any trustees have any further questions of Director Super?
Good idea.
Okay. Is this on the omnibus for tonight?
It is also on the omnibus
Okay.
for tonight.
Okay, then, no further discussion on number 2. Then moving to number 3, Resolution 23-2719. Trustee John?
Sure.
That comes out of your committee.
Authorizing and approving a settlement agreement between Crown Castle LLC and the Village of Western Springs relative to small cell wireless facilities, and approving certain waivers and modifications to village codes, regulations, and design standards regarding small cell wireless facilities. Do you want to?
Sure, absolutely. Just really quickly, I want to make a note that in our meeting of February 27th and our meeting of March 13th, we discussed the settlement agreement at length. Had quite a bit of public comment, which I think was really well received. I know we learned a lot from the public, and we learned a lot from our consultant, Stu Chapman, who was with us. Attorney Mars took a lot of that feedback and a lot of the advice that we received, and he was able to negotiate with Crown Castle the agreement that's in your packet. Attorney Jerusik is here if you have questions on the actual agreement. I do want to make one note in the minutes from the prior meetings. Stu Chapman was referred to as an industry consultant. He is a village consultant or a municipal consultant, so I would just ask that the board, when you approve the minutes this evening, make that correction to ensure that people understand in the future reading of the minutes that Stu Chapman was the village's consultant in this matter. Other than that, I would just point out that that the agreement has some room in it for if a future change needs to be made, we can do that. We'll be continuing to work with Crown Castle on the specifics of the agreement, and we think that at this point, we're at a point where the village would be facing imminent litigation if the board does not take action on the settlement agreement tonight. So that is what you have before you. I'm happy to answer any questions. The team here from the staff who've worked on it are here, and certainly Attorney Jerusik, in terms of the agreement itself, can answer questions.
And just a couple comments to some of the questions we heard. First, I think Mr. Bizzoni, you mentioned, what happens if these facilities are taken out of service. The state law and our primary ordinance on small cells does cover abandonment and removal, so those things are covered. You had mentioned, trees. We do have in ordinance construction in the right-of-ways. We have a tree trimming and vegetation control regulations, and that's also when utilities come in, to do work in the rights-of-way and public utility easements. There's a permitting process, and so you're covered there. Ms. Perlman, you had mentioned, concern with public health and safety, and again, it's not to be, a tired drum, but the reality is the federal government and our state legislature in adopting this act took away the village's, rights significantly in this area, and the health safety component of RF emissions is not something that the local municipalities can regulate, unfortunately. That's been taken away by, federal jurisdiction and a state enactment. And I think I've checked
The lighting was the other
the lighting. and-
Village standard of lighting.
The village standard of lighting will be, it's covered in our ordinance that we will get village standard lighting. And, to the extent they replace poles, there was a decorative light standard, so, and that was something that was part of our original design, aesthetic design guidelines. So those are the comments I have.
Any trustees have any questions of village staff or Attorney Jerusik?
Well, I think that, Ellen, you addressed it. If there's some small drafting or some other small items, you're saying that the document is still sort of living?
It
Or-
is.
yeah, okay.
However, the village is committing to what's in it today as
Okay.
well. Mhm.
Okay.
So approving as written, but yet still some opportunity. I'm
There's a
not sure I
clause,
follow.
there's a clause that indicates that if other communities that we've been working with, Clarendon Hills and Hinsdale, negotiate something different,
I
or
see.
if there are some things that need to be agreed upon and both parties agree, that we can go ahead and add those things in.
We're not obligated to, but we can opt to.
That's right.
Correct.
If another community does ask for something that isn't appropriate for Western Springs, we're not
Exactly, that's my
obligated.
point, yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah. So there is that flexibility, but again, this is a function of trying to avoid litigation. And that's where we are today, under the threat of litigation. And, that doesn't mean you're knuckling under. It means we've been at this a long time, and this is a very measured approach to trying to resolve an issue that, has been discussed and, has been reviewed. Sure. I'm just saying that this is just, again, a measured approach to something that has been discussed for a number of years, and we are now at a point, where, action is imminent.
Does he ask a question?
If you want.
Okay. Although public comment is closed, you may ask us a question, please, feel free.
Probably should
But come up again, just so that you have you on, for the citizens at home. I have to do that. I don't want to. We didn't, yeah.
I mean, I think I brought up a very important point regarding the RF report, and I'd like to get feedback on that. I'd like to hear what you have to say about what I did present to you with an independent RF engineer, reviewed the Ericsson antennas that they're going to be putting, and then the report that was given by Crown Castle. That report is an illusion of what the truth is on it, and it's going to impact occupational and personal distance with that. I really would like you to please look at that and review that, because that's pretty important with how that's going to impact things. And if an industry isn't being upfront with their information at the beginning, why get into an agreement with them?
The response to that would be, we'll take your comments under advisement. We'll vet who this person is, and
Okay.
there will be a period of time, in terms of the permit review process, and staff and Stu Chapman, the village's municipal consultant, not an industry consultant, can give us input on the comments that you've raised.
Okay, thank you. And the RF engineer was recommended to me by a former FCC NEPA attorney. So I don't think you can get any more vetted than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perlman. Any trustees have any further questions or discussion with village staff on this matter before we come to a vote? No? Okay, you did present the resolution. Is there a second on this resolution?
No, actually.
Oh, you didn't, okay.
No, yeah, let me,
Okay.
so I'd like to motion to approve the resolution number 23-2719, authorizing and approving the settlement between, it's the exact same. No, it's not. Settlement between Crown Castle LLC and the Village of Western Springs relative to small wireless facilities and approving certain waivers and modifications to village codes, regulations, and design standards regarding small wireless facilities.
Thank you, trustee John. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Clerk Timmett, we have a roll call of the trustees.
Yes, trustee Terrell. Trustee Fink is absent. Trustee Lewis.
Aye.
Trustee Rudolph.
Recognizing our authority, aye.
Trustee Terrell.
Aye.
Trustee Jen.
Aye.
Trustee John.
Aye.
Motion passes.
I do thank you all for your comments, and again, as Ms. Bear said, this is a working document. We will certainly make sure all of this is considered by our experts as we move through this. So thank you very much for coming. Okay. You guys were very thorough in your presentations, and I appreciate that, too.
Thank you for your emails.
You know, the vote is over, but if you have something to say.
I understand there are going to be changes that will still be made to the draft that was seen today, changes in clarification.
Yeah, potentially, your comments will be taken under consideration.
To
Okay, so
clarify
is
the
this a
12-foot.
final or just sort of a,
This is a final approval tonight.
this is a final approval of a document that isn't quite final yet?
No, the document,
The document, if there will be any refinements, it will be refined, based on the village attorney's, final penmanship. Yes, it is final tonight in the packet. What you saw, and to the extent anything can be added to it, as the manager said, that will be reviewed, and we will see if we can't strike an accord beyond the terms that are in this document.
So you're anticipating that there will be amendments to it?
We are, to the extent amendments will be made, they will be made. If the document's amended, it'll come back at a later date. But tonight, what got approved is what we're going forward with.
I understand, I guess I'm confused about how final the final is. It sounds like to me that this is final, that the document is final, but you're anticipating that there could be changes. And if that happens, will it come back before the board
I
to
just said
discuss
that.
those changes?
I just said that, yeah. If this is amended at some point, there will be an addendum or an amendment brought forward.
Thank
So
you.
for example, like the 12-foot language, like if that's
Yeah, if
clarified as an
if that needs to
example,
formally be revised in an amendment,
then we
we'll
would
bring it
bring that
back.
amendment
Right.
back to the board.
But
with that.
tonight, we talked about
Understood.
that, and if it's as simple as
Clarifying the sentence.
clarifying the sentence and dropping in antennas, electronic equipment,
Radio
not
equipment.
counting antennas, if we can insert that in and not have to do a full amendment,
I see.
a de minimis type change like that, for clarification, we'll do that. If it's something that Crown Castle wants to be handled by amendment, it'll come back at a future board meeting. But tonight's settlement agreement, we plan to execute so that we can make sure that we avoid litigation.
I understand that. And there's also that subsection Q,
I think you said H.
H. Okay. The one that anticipates that additional changes can be made if there's a favorable provision negotiated by another village.
Yeah, the language in the agreement talks about this agreement automatically incorporating any more favorable provisions that are executed by either of the other towns. So we wouldn't need an amendment. But again, for clarity's sake and for disclosure, if there are any other amendments that need to be made, we'll make sure there's notice to the community. We'll make sure it's posted on the website. If we think it's necessary to put them in an addendum to clarify things, we'll do that.
I noticed, too, that there was no addressing of the pentachlorophenol issue. Is that still on the table?
As we said at the last meeting, that's something that we would deal with at a later date. That was not addressed in this
No,
agreement.
I understand. I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that it was still under consideration in some form.
Yes.
Thank you.
Correct, but
That issue raised is also something we'd like to address in our code for all people putting that type of utility pole into the community, not just this Crown Castle agreement. So we would look at that as a
more
code
broad,
amendment. That's right.
Okay. That concludes that item. Thank you, everyone. Then moving on to consideration of action on the agenda items. The Illinois state statutes allow a municipality to collectively vote on a group of ordinances, resolutions, and other motions such as awards of contract, appointments, and things of that nature. This is known as an omnibus vote. All the items contained on the omnibus vote list have been previously discussed by the President and the Board of Trustees on at least one occasion, and often on several occasions. By placing them on the omnibus vote list, a single vote may be taken to approve them. A trustee may remove any item from the list and have it discussed and voted on separately prior to the omnibus vote. Is there any such request? Hearing none, I think you would have the floor on this then. And thank you, Trustee Rudolph.
Thank you. President Pro Tem Terrell, I move that the following ordinances, resolutions, and motions as contained on the meeting agenda for March 20th, 2023 be adopted and/or approved under an omnibus vote. Item number 1, approval of the meeting minutes of February 27th, 2023 as amended. Item number 2, ordinance number 23-3123, approving and authorizing the execution of a deductive closeout change order to local public agency agreement entered into between the Village of Western Springs and IDOT for the Wolf Road Bike Path Project, final balancing change order, $47,145.86. Agenda item number 3, ordinance number 23-3124, approving the creation of a Class I special events on property owned or leased by a not-for-profit organization liquor license for issuance to the Western Springs Park District for the 100-year anniversary centennial special event to be held Friday, September 8th, 2023 through September 10th, 2023 at Spring Rock Park. Agenda item number 4, ordinance number 23-3125, amending Title IV, Liquor Control, of the Western Springs Municipal Code relative to the number of Class O, that's craft beer, wine, and spirits establishment license, on-site consumption and package sales, liquor licenses which can be issued in the Village of Western Springs, Cook County, Illinois. Applicant Clever Drinker LLC, doing business as the Western Springs Cellar for the 820 Burlington Avenue property. Agenda item number 5, ordinance number 23-3126, ratifying the approval of an engagement letter for professional services with Ryan LLC to perform a financial analysis of the KLM 514 Hillgrove Avenue mixed-use project and authorizing certain expenditures from the Downtown North Tax Increment Financing District to pay for such services. Parentheses, TIF financial analysis and tax projections by Ryan LLC, close parentheses. Agenda item number 6, ordinance number 23-3127, approving budget amendment / transfer over $10,000 to the fiscal year 2023 operating budget in the roadway construction fund and the downtown south TIF fund. Agenda item number 7, ordinance number 23-3128, amending Title V, Public Health and Safety, Chapter 5, Trees and Shrubs, Sections 5-5-2, Definitions, 5-5-3, Preservation, and 5-5-7, Legacy Tree Preservation of the Western Springs Municipal Code regarding updates to certain definitions and regulations within the Urban Forest Management Plan relating to legacy trees and underrepresented species. Agenda item number 8, ordinance number 23-3129, approving and authorizing the execution of change order number 1 relative to the professional services agreement between the Village of Western Springs and James J. Bennis and Associates, Inc. for Phase 1 design engineering services and Phase 2 engineering services regarding the Central Avenue Sewer and Roadway Improvement Project, 47th Street to Burlington Avenue. Agenda item number 9, ordinance number 23-3130, approving an amendment to the fiscal year 2023 Village Pay Plan to implement a title change and reclassification of the building inspector plan reviewer position to the building official position and a pay grade adjustment, pay grade 6. Agenda item number 10, resolution number 23-2720, authorizing and approving the execution of supplemental professional services agreements between the Village of Western Springs and James J. Bennis and Associates, Inc. for additional Phase 1 design engineering services and Phase 2 engineering services regarding the Central Avenue Sewer Separation and Roadway Improvements Project, 47th Street to Burlington Avenue. Agenda item number 11, resolution number 23-2721, approving and authorizing the execution of a professional services agreement between the Village of Western Springs and H.R. Green, Inc. for the performance of Phase 2 design engineering services and survey services for the Woodland Avenue reconstruction project. Agenda item number 12, resolution number 23-2722, authorizing the approval of the December 1st, 2022 TIF incentive rebate payment to Hawthorne 45 LLC and the transfer of TIF funds into the Downtown South TIF Incentive Fund for the benefit of the Western Springs Downtown South TIF District. Agenda item number 13, resolution number 23-2723, authorizing the approval and execution of a labor agreement between the Village of Western Springs and Metropolitan Alliance of Police, Western Springs Police, Chapter 360. Agenda item number 14, resolution number 23-2724, approving and adopting amendments to the 2022 Urban Forest Management Plan for guidance on urban forestry issues with the Village of Western Springs. Agenda item number 15, motion to award a contract to lowest cost qualified and responsible bidder, Brightview Landscape Services, for the 2023 landscaping services contract in an amount not to exceed $88,900. Agenda item 16, motion to award a contract to lowest cost qualified and responsible bidder, Desiderio Landscaping, for the 2023 tree removal contract in an amount not to exceed $60,000. Agenda item 17, motion to award a contract to lowest cost qualified and responsible bidder, Narduli Construction Company, for the 2023 sidewalk replacement program in the amount of $110,000. And agenda item number 18, motion to temporary use permit for the operation of a carnival at the 2023 Western Springs Park District 100-year anniversary centennial celebration, carnival operator Salerno.
Thank you very much, Trustee Rudolph. I don't think I could have done any better than that myself. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Clerk Timick, may we have a roll call vote?
Yes, Trustee Terrell. Ken.
Aye.
Trustee Fink is absent. Trustee John.
Aye.
Trustee Lewis.
Aye.
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 Ordinances, resolutions, and motions contained in the agenda of March 20th, 2023 are hereby adopted or
Thank you, Clerk Timick. Now moving on to the reports. Number 1, monthly financial report. Trustee Rudolph, is there a financial report for this month?
There is not. The February 23 financial reports will be presented in April.
Thank you. I'm not aware of any thing that Village President Gallagher had to be discussed. Okay, then moving on to 3, Village Manager Bear
No report tonight.
and Village Attorney Jerusik.
No report tonight.
Okay, that concluding our business, would there be a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting?
I'll make that motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Roll call vote?
voice vote?
Oh, voice vote. We're all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Tonight's meeting is adjourned. Thank you.